It's funny to me sometimes. The law's funny because we have these topics and these issues that pop up from time to time, like reasonableness. And, what is reasonable in a given situation? The law actually calls that objective. You should be able to determine what's reasonable. I always find that a little bit amusing. But let me go ahead and let's talk about this for a second. Again, this is part of my continuing theme of trying to hit some real life stories and to attempt to help illustrate things and make it a little bit easier to follow. Let me pull this up. These things just basically keep me on track. That's really all that I've got these things for. Contract law, reasonable time, and other issues. Um, in addition to, reasonableness being some sort of objective standard, I'm also intrigued by how many people think that law is fair. One of the things that we talked about the first part of the semester was we talked about the reasonable person standard. And that really applies in a lot of different things. What's the reasonably prudent action in this given scenario? You might even have a medical malpractice case with a reasonably prudent doctor operating in this particular type of specialty. And then, of course, you have reasonable time, and we've already talked about reasonable time in one instance, and I'm going to talk about it in a different instance today with that. Um, and I'll explain that just a little bit later. Is law fair? No, that's generally not the principle that guides law and directs law. But is law reasonable? Yeah, usually that's really what we talk about, that law is supposed to be reasonable. Well, one of the things that I wanted to introduce, and this is new, but I do want you to know this for purposes of the exam. I like to explain that, and that's the Uniform Commercial Code. The UCC has been adopted in all 50 states in some respect, and Alabama being no exception to that. And the UCC, being the Uniform Commercial Code, deals with the sale of goods across state lines, and it basically exists. It's uniform, so that parties will usually know what the law is, even though they're dealing in California and they're working with a company in Alabama, much like my company itself. In my situation, the company that I represented is a company from California, but was owned by people from Taiwan. They sold, and that'll be relevant here in a minute. They sold these precision cutting lathe machines, very expensive lathe machines. In our situation, they sold my California company owned by people from Taiwan. They sold this heavy duty precision cutting lathe machine, and this is I probably had this case 25 years ago. It's been a long time. I'm old. And they sold it for probably $150,000 to a company in Shelby County, Alabama. And the problem was the machine, when it arrived, the company from Shelby County, Alabama, they unpacked it, did what they're supposed to set it up, all that kind of stuff. And they started noticing some things like the bolts were rusted on the product. And then they looked, and there's an internal meter that shows how many hours that the product had been operated, kind of like an odometer on a car. And rather than it maybe a few hours for testing purposes, it had many, many more hours than that, indicating that no, this probably wasn't a new machine. They're selling us a used machine and pretending that it is new. My company and their company uh, started haggling with each other, and my company, and I say my company, my client, I should say, my client's company. They weren't my client at the time. Only when this dispute arose did they become my client. And they kept saying, new machine, new machine, it's a new machine. Their position was, well, we might have used it in trade shows to show people or something, and there may be a few more. No, it wasn't like that at all. There were, as I said, there were rusted parts there. There were things that they had painted over. It was a used machine. So after about 3 weeks of haggling with each other, my client finally said, fine, we'll replace it. That's where the UCC comes in. The Uniform Commercial Code gives the right to sellers when there is a sale of non-conforming goods. Um, and when they sold non-conforming goods, the buyer has to say, hey, this was supposed to be a product made out of wool. Instead, it's a product made out of polyester, or this was supposed to be a new machine, and instead it's a used machine, or whatever the case may be, whatever the situation may be where it's non-conforming, it the seller has to be given the opportunity to fix it. And they must do so under the UCC, and it's called cure, the right to cure the non-conforming product or the non-conforming defect. And they have the right to do so as long as they do so within a reasonable time. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I tried this case. This was my first ever jury trial that I'd ever tried in my life. On Saturday morning, before the trial started on Monday, um, I got a call from my law partner who was scheduled to try this case. And he said, Daryl, I have a problem. And the problem is his wife had been in a car accident and she was in the hospital and he could not try the case. My client, I told you a minute ago, this would be relevant, um, were Taiwanese citizens generally, and some of them had flown in from Taiwan for the trial, including our expert witness. The other interesting part about this is that, gee, 5 of my 6 witnesses that I had for the trial didn't speak English. How about that for your first jury trial? I'm in federal court, wasn't expecting to try a case, got dumped on me Saturday before the Monday trial date started. And not only is it in federal court, but I have foreign witnesses who don't speak English, and I'm having to examine them with an official court interpreter. Um, Guys, if you practice law long enough, you represent good clients and you represent bad clients, and not all your clients are always on the right side. And I certainly had clients in this situation who were not on the right side. Um, so we tried the case, and I argued at the appropriate time, established the facts, established that we had actually offered to replace it with a brand new machine, and that the buyer had declined that offer. The buyer, I argued, was in breach of the contract, not us. UCC says, hey, you're given the right to do that. They wouldn't let us have the right. They breached the contract. Well, the jury went to the jury on Friday. It started on Monday. Went to the jury on a Friday morning. And the jury was out for many hours and came back, and they had a question for the judge. And they asked the judge, what is a reasonable time? Now, 3 weeks, $150,000 precision cutting lathe machine. And again, this was 25 years ago. 150,000 then, worth a lot more now. I don't know what much, but a lot more. Not that 150,000 today is still not a lot of money. But they said, what's a reasonable time? And the judge instructed them. They were seeing that they wanted a number. They wanted, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 3 weeks, something. The judge would not give them a number. The judge instructed them properly that reasonableness is determined by the trier of fact. In this case, you, the jury. You decide what is a reasonable time based upon the governing facts and circumstances of the case. You decide what is reasonable under those scenarios. So they went back to the jury room. They came back a short time later and found against my client. That's all they needed to hear, is they got to decide whether 3 weeks was reasonable or not. And they decided 3 weeks wasn't reasonable. And because of that, they found against my client, because they, um, in fact, sold them a used machine instead of a new machine. Um, think about that when we talk about things like the reasonable time for an offer to remain open. When you make an offer and to form a contract, the offeree can accept it, and that offer doesn't remain open forever. It will lapse. It will terminate by operation of law after a reasonable time. What is a reasonable time? Don't know. In this case, 3 weeks was too long. In your case, 3 weeks may be fine. It just depends. And again, this points out one more thing. The answer is not important. What's important is being able to critically analyze all these issues and things and get that correct on the exam. Thanks. Be looking for the next one.